is.
Everybody knows who everybody is.
It's always somebody knows somebody. So, what we're going to actually be talking about is the suspect section.
And there's a few. There's some good ones. I kind of like. See, who we got here?
You like that one?
Yeah, I like that one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Better than the other ones. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's dive into this, and we'll take them in the order that I've got them on here. How's that sound, Joe?
Sure. Why not?
Fine.
Okay. So the first theory or suspect is a local, so saying that it's a local to the area who lives in the area, who also happens to be related to a convicted felon. And this will make sense why that's described that way in just a second.
Maybe.
Because one of the things that we do know is that DNA evidence was pulled from the first 3 bodies, and there's no results of who that is. Whoever it is not in the system.
Yeah.
However, there is another available to law enforcement, another searching method, which is called familial DNA. And that's the method that was used to catch the Grim Sleeper, who we talked to Christine about yesterday.
Yeah.
And it could possibly do a lot in helping to solve this case, which it did with Lonnie, and that's what brought him down.
And it is admissible.
Why
wouldn't it be?
There's some issues with it, but we talked to Christine about familial DNA along with the potential roadblocks of its use.
Mm-hmm.
Just a quick heads up. We did the interview over Skype, so as usual with Skype, the audio can be a little funky-dunky. Did what we could to clean it up, but let's go ahead and go to that audio.
Well, I think that, a lot like ACLU and, civil liberty organizations and civil rights organizations, they believe it's an invasion of privacy, and they think that it unfairly targets minorities, because there's more minorities like African Americans, Hispanics, etc. in prison. So they're saying that it unfairly targets that population. Like England did a study many years ago, and they found that, like, if you're for the familial DNA, because as you know, like Lonnie, they had his DNA, but Lonnie had never gone to prison, so he had never been swabbed. So that's why they didn't know who he was, but they knew he was matched to the victims in the 80s and the victims in the 2000s because of they found saliva on many of the women's breasts. And so they knew he was, there was one killer, but because he wasn't in any felon data bank, they couldn't find him. So that's why they decided to use that familial DNA. And it was the first time actually in California, actually in the U.S., that they used familial DNA testing to find a serial killer. And they checked it in 2008. And how it goes with the familial DNA, I mean, it had been England had been using it for many years, and basically they said that if you're a felon, there's a 40% chance that you're going to have like a male relative, like a cousin, an uncle, a brother, a father who's a felon. So if you're not in the data bank, there's a 40% chance that you're going to have a relative who's in the data bank.
That makes sense.
And so that's why they did it in 2008, and it came back nothing. And then they did it 2 years later, and the felon data bank had grown 400,000. And so they did it again, and Lonnie's son, Christopher, had been charged with carrying a weapon, and he pled guilty. And as a result of his plea, he got swabbed, and that was in 2009. So he was in the system for, just like close to a year, before they did that second DNA swab, and it came back as a match to him, but they knew it wasn't him because he would have been about 2 years old when the murder started. So they knew, right? So they knew he had to be, they knew he was related to the killer. And so they actually looked for any relative. And there was an uncle. Well, they thought there was an uncle in Rancho Cucamonga, but they ended up checking it out and finding that there was no relation. And then they found out that his father, Lonnie, lived like on 81st and Western, which was like at the epicenter of where all the murders took place. And so that's why they ended up, following, Lonnie.
If something like this doesn't happen, then it's going to be very tough to catch this guy. And we actually, in that same conversation, we had talked about some other serial killer cases that were solved via DNA, and what a stroke of luck it was that particular person got caught through that method.
Look at what happened with the Green River Killer. It was like 20-something years before they finally caught him. Same with BTK.
I remember, too. I was around for living in the area, and a lot of people were very angry after all those years, and they still hadn't caught the guy. And I'm going, it's just like you said, though. You're looking for a needle in a haystack. I mean, it's expecting a lot, really, to help. And it's really lucky that guy's kid got busted the year before they nabbed him.
Well, I don't think they ever, if it wasn't for that familial DNA and that his son busted, I don't think they ever would have caught. Yeah. I think it was just too difficult. You know, it was just too hard. They were really lucky. I think they were pretty shocked themselves.
But I mean, so after all that, I agree with Christine that we were indeed lucky that they got Lonnie Franklin Jr.
lucky.
The way that they did.
Yeah.
And by the way, generally speaking, serial killers like this, usually, unless they really kind of are trying to get caught, they usually don't get caught.
Yeah.
It just is a fact.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of their thing is they want to have their fun, and their fun is not had behind bars.
Uh-huh.
I don't know why people consider it fun, but okay.
Yeah, I don't know, but Dexter did.
So we have talked about already the path of the killings and
the arrow.
The four east to west, or 8 kilometers between the first two bodies, and it's about 2.5 miles north to south, or 4 kilometers between the second pair of bodies. And that's a really small range, and that's why it makes me think that this particular person is a local and that they wanted to stay in an area that was familiar to them, which is, again, this is something else that we talked with Christine about when it comes to the Grim Sleeper case, because Lonnie did the same thing. He stayed close to home.
He hunted in his own backyard, and that's like most serial killers do that. I mean, they had back in the 80s in South Los Angeles, there was 6 serial killers operating at the same time, and they were able to identify all of them, actually, and all of them lived in South Los Angeles. I mean, Chester Turner was one of the serial killers, and he hunted like literally within 2 blocks of where he lived with his mother. You know, they like familiar territory. You know, they don't want to be surprised. They want to know. Lonnie was a garbage man, and he knew the alleyways, like he knew the dumpsters of South Los Angeles, because that's where he worked, right? So they want to feel comfortable. So that's why most serial killers actually operate, in the same area where they dump their bodies.
I was always kind of wondering too if one of the reasons they do it is they're just trying to clean up the neighborhood. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't mean that in a harsh, judgmental way, but I mean, seriously, is that possibly a motivator for some of these guys that they don't really approve of that activity and they'd like to see it sort of discouraged?
Well, I mean, obviously that was the case for Lonnie. I mean, it's obvious he considered the women trash, right? And so he dumped their bodies in trash. So he considered them trash. And his wife was there. Yeah, in dumpsters, and his wife was very religious, so there was something for him. I think he had this like compulsion. I think that he couldn't control himself. I mean, he was always after women. He was like addicted to women, and I think that in his case, he also had this deep-seated hatred, and where it came from, it's hard to say because it seemed like he had a good relationship with his mother and his sister. So it's hard to say exactly how he ended up, hating women so much. But, I think that's what he thought. I think he thought he was cleaning the streets.
Yeah.
So now let's go to our second possible suspect. So the first one's kind of amorphous.
Just like
it's a general description. Yeah, I get it. The second person is an actual person, and that's a guy by the name of David Lindsay. In 2007, David Lindsay was arrested for killing a 71-year-old man. Now, Mr. Lindsay had also previously served out a sentence for killing his own wife, but he had been working as a volunteer in a homeless shelter in the area. And when he was tracked down for killing the 71-year-old man, whose name was Austin Dale Runyon, back in 2001, people started to ask, well, maybe this is the guy. The thing about Lindsay is that he had strangled the old man and left him in the home, so it doesn't appear that a gun was used. But because he's close, people want to know, was it him? They swabbed his DNA. And for a while, until the DNA came back, everybody was like, yeah, I think we might have got him. And then, no.
That's one thing that
totally not him.
That's always bothered me about cases like this, when people are like, well, this person killed another human, so he must be a serial killer. And it's like,
yeah, I know.
There's nothing to tie, there's nothing to suggest that that person who is admittedly a horrible human being is the same kind of horrible human being. He strangled a 71-year-old man in his own home and then left him for dead. I mean, left him. Right?
That's different.
Totally different than picking up young women, and shooting them in the back of the head. Are you kidding me?
And
no.
He shot his own wife, or killed his own wife, I should say. Which again, she wasn't a young woman that he was tracking down for his own pleasure.
I guess that technically weren't young women as victims, but they, women.
Yeah. No, I know where you're going.
Anyway.
So no, Lindsay.
Not 71.
No. So Lindsay was ruled out.
Good.
Which takes us to our third suspect, which is Robert Rembert Jr. Mr. Rembert was you like that name?
Yeah.
RRJ?
What's that?
RRJ was arrested back in 2015 and charged with killing 4 people in Cleveland, Ohio. One was a family member, and the other was a family friend, and he killed those 2 people in the same night. He shot them both. The other 2 that he is charged with killing were women, and their bodies were found. Both had been raped, and both had been strangled, and both had DNA evidence on them that was recovered, and that DNA would be matched back to Robert Rembert.
Probably not saliva in this case.
I don't believe it was, but I'm sure people, if anybody knows who Rembert is, they're saying, well, why are you including a guy that's from Cleveland, Ohio, in a story that's in Daytona Beach, Florida?
Isn't there a Dayton, Ohio? There you go, it's Dayton. That's all you need to know.
That's totally the connection that I made, yes.
Absolutely.
Or it was the fact that Rembert was a long-haul truck driver. And so he would have run routes, or he could have run routes down to Florida, which would have put him into the same area where these women were at. Again, the same problem with Lindsay, though. They have him. They have his DNA. They confirmed that it was the DNA found on the body of these 2 strangled and raped women. So it's a pretty easy slam dunk to say, does it match these other women? Which apparently nothing has come out about that. So I'm pretty sure that they checked that and said, no, it's not him.
But
again,
more than that, it was over the course of they were 1 year apart, these murders.
The women?
Yeah.
No. They were many years apart.
No. The actual victims of the serial killer that we are talking about.
Oh, Daytona Beach serial killer. Yes, they were all within 3 months.
Yeah, that seems like a weird amount of time for a long-haul truck driver to complete. I don't know.
Took a Christmas vacation.
No, what?
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah, but
I get it, and that's why I don't think that's right.
Yeah.
And again, I think the DNA doesn't support it, or they would have charged him with more murder.
Yeah.
Well, this is one of those dealios, I think, where these guys became suspects in the papers because, well, the papers had to write about something.
Yeah.
And, so the police said, yeah, we're checking this guy's DNA. It's probably a nothing murder, but, we're checking his DNA. So next thing you know, you got to add that to the story because you got to fatten up the story because otherwise you're just repeating the story.
Yeah.
You got to add something to it. So there you go. But yeah, these guys had nothing to do with it, I'm sure.
Can I ask you a question, Joe?
Yeah.
Where do you order a nothing burger?
Usually go to any major publication, any major network. There's lots of that stuff.
I've never heard of that one before. That's a good phrase.
We never heard of Nothing Burger?
Nope.
Yeah.
Never heard of that one. Next up on our list is, it's kind of not. It's another one that's not a very exact.
Another dumb
trucker.
one.
Yeah.
Well, it's the unknown trucker, aka the I-4 killer, which in the news there is occasional murmurs of there being an I-4 killer, which again is a major freeway. And if you've ever listened to any of our other serial killer shows, you'll know that this is a very familiar theory. It basically says that there's some killer roaming up and down a particular stretch or several stretches of freeway, and randomly picking out a girl that he takes a fancy to and doing whatever he wants to do for himself, and then leaving her dead body behind. That's what this is. It's very common, but apparently
it's a very common theory, not a very common proven thing that happens.
Correct.
I'm sure it does happen.
Correct.
Probably, but we can't say definitively, it's very common that this happens all the time. There's tons of serial killers out there.
Yeah, every other truck driver. I know.
Maybe not so much, Devin, because according to the FBI, they've been tracking murders all over the country, and they're actually looking into a whole bunch of them that are happening on the freeway system to determine if there's connections to them and how they're related to one another. So the FBI, granted, the FBI takes murder very seriously, but they've actually got a page that talks about the map and what they're trying to do to see if these things are all linked.
Sounds to me like a really good application for a little bit of data mining.
Probably.
And, that would definitely be the way to do this. I mean, it would be hard to assemble all the data, but, if you can get all the manifests and schedules from all the long-haul truck drivers and all their routes and time states and everything, put it all in there, all these different crimes and everything, and just grind
Make your own
away
version
for a
of
while.
Google Death Map.
Yeah, and just grind away for a while and see, whose routes match up to what strings of murders,
It strikes me the FBI should hire Watson, the computer.
Watson, yeah. You don't mean Watson the dog?
No, I mean Watson the computer.
Okay.
Yeah, wrong one.
No, dang it.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so when I was on the FBI's website and I was reading through, there's a really good statement that talks about some of this. And which one? I want one of you to read this because I've been blathering. Okay, Joe.
Not you. Okay.
Can you read this statement from the FBI on what they believe?
Oh, okay. Let's see. Well, hang on. FBI voice. Here we go. The victims in these cases are primarily women who live in high-risk fancy lifestyle.
Is that your FBI voice? Can we have your regular voice?
Oh, okay. Let's try a regular voice. The victims in these cases are primarily women who are living high-risk, transient lifestyles, often involving substance abuse and prostitution. They're frequently picked up at truck stops or service stations and sexually assaulted, murdered, and dumped along a highway. The suspects are predominantly long-haul truck drivers, but the mobile nature of the offenders, the unsafe lifestyles of the victims, the significant distances and multiple jurisdictions involved, and the scarcity of witnesses or forensic evidence can make these cases tough to solve. Which is, unquote, by the way, kind of an understatement, tough to solve. Yeah.
I was going to say, that's a really nice recap of what we literally just said.
Yep.
Yeah.
But hey, it's the FBI, so it's authoritative.
Yeah.
I think we're just as authoritative.
I'm tired of the FBI stealing our stuff.
Yeah. In the future,
Damn
the
you,
past.
FBI.
Yeah.
Dang it.
Well, so the reason that I wanted to bring that up is, and have that statement in there, is that, as you read about these possible connections, it's easy to say, well, that just seems too far-fetched and it's too much. But the more you read the internet, the more that it strips away your little security blanket and leaves behind some really terrible people for you to be, stuck with.
Let's be honest, it only really takes 45 minutes on the internet on a conspiracy site to suddenly be like, you're right, the world is flat and we are living on the surface of the sun.
Yeah.
Honestly, you can convince yourself of almost anything.
Well, but what I'm talking about is actual people, because the first 3 people that came up when I ran a Google search of something like killer traveling across the United States, I don't remember what my search was, but I got John Paul Knowles, Glenn Edward Rogers, and Israel Keys. 3 very despicable human beings.
Oh yeah, they're not by far the only ones. There's
they're the first ones
Yeah.
that came up. They were the first 3 people that showed up in my search. I didn't bother to catalog the search because it was too disturbing.
Yeah.
When you go hitchhiking on the freeway, just take your gat with you. Oh, well, I guess
Pretty good
there's
way to do
that.
it too.
Yeah. So the last thing that I want to talk about when we come to this unknown trucker theory is one of the things that has always baffled me about these situations is that there doesn't ever seem to be a witness. And so initially at one point they didn't know if it was a transient worker or somebody like that in the Grim Sleeper case. I remember reading some little bits of that. But when we talked to Christine, we asked her specifically about why there didn't seem to be anybody that was witnessing the crimes.
You know, a lot of them was, I think the only reason, I think a lot of it was that it was late at night and there wasn't a lot of people out on the street.
Yeah, I think also.
I think that's why. And I mean, and also too, I mean, he knew what he was doing. So, you know, he's going to be stealthy, right? He's not going to do it when there's 100 people around. You know, he's going to make sure it's late at night. And I mean, when the police were following him around, you know, after they got the familial DNA from the son, the match with the son, they followed him around, and he left his home one night at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and he went to 42nd and Western, which was like kind of a popular prostitution hangout, and there was 2 girls standing on the street, and it was really secluded, and the detectives, there was this undercover cop following him, and he made a point to say to the detectives, he's like, I'm afraid that he's going to find out that I'm following him, because there was like literally no one on the street. So he picks times when there's not a lot of people around. You know, that's why I think there's, you know, no witnesses.
Do you think?
And then he brings them to alleyways, and there's not a lot of people hanging out in the alleyways at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, and I'd like to say also that there's another reason probably is they nipped off somewhere to commit a sex act, which requires a little bit of privacy.
AKA the alley.
Yeah, the alley or behind the bushes or somewhere where you're not going to be seen by anybody. And, you know, and that's the best thing about it. That's probably another reason prostitutes are favored targets, because you talk to a regular female, and you say, hey, by the way, why don't we go off to this place where nobody can see us, just by ourselves, you know? And
it's the alleyway. It'll be cool.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
Whereas a prostitute is not going to bat an eyelash and anything like that. Of course, you want to go somewhere where you're not going to be seen.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you on that.
Yeah.
Appears to be that's how that thing works.
Yeah.
We have
another one, another suspect.
We have actually one more suspect, and this is one I found on my own. So I did a little bit of internet sleuthing, and I found a very young, upstanding citizen while casting about the internet, using such wonderful terms as shot, prostitute, Florida, 2000s, and probably 1 or 2 other very lovely keywords.
I bet you got a ton of like people, right?
I actually did get a fair number, but one of them that came back is a guy by the name of Curtis L. Richardson. And Mr. Richardson has been in the custody of the great state of Florida for a host of reasons, the current of which is second-degree murder.
Okay.
Prior to that, he was under lock and key for a number of drug-related charges, but the one that earned him his current stay was the shooting in the head of a prostitute in May of 2010 in a dispute over drugs. Now, I looked through his records and I found some, I would